Acting on an anonymous phone call, the police raid a house to arrest a suspected murderer. They don't know what he looks like, but they know that he is a man. They bust in on a carpenter, a mechanic, a surgeon, and a lawyer, all playing poker. Without hesitation or communication of any kind, they immediately arrest the carpenter. But how do they know that he is the murderer?
The answer is simple, yet often overlooked. The carpenter is the only man. But why couldn't we think of that? Our perception of societal norms inhibits us from recognizing the possibility that the other characters are in fact female. This classic and seemingly frivolous example conveys a greater meaning, that is, the duality present in the power of perception.
Perception is the mental faculty that enables us to assign meaning to something. The only meaning something has is the meaning we give to it. Perception allows us to act and understand the environment to which we are accustomed.
In essence, the closer you look, the less you see. We're often stuck living in one single perspective that inhibits us from seeing a greater array of perspectives. This limits us, causing us to neglect our different options. Recognizing the power this single perspective holds over our lives enables us to broaden our minds and expand our horizons.
Perception holds great power over our lives. Every decision we make can ultimately be seen as a result of our perception of the corresponding situation. Varying perceptions create different decisions.
When we change our perceptions, we quite literally change our life. So how do we train ourselves to see things differently?
Please take a look at the rotating woman projected above. Which direction is she rotating in? Clockwise or counterclockwise?
Now, please take a look at this next slide and try to understand how someone might perceive her as rotating in the opposite direction.
Initially, you saw the woman rotating in one direction, either clockwise or counterclockwise. But once we introduce you to this new understanding, this new perception, hopefully you are able to see the other side of the coin, the woman rotating both counterclockwise and clockwise. This is perception shaping interpretation.
But maybe you still don't believe us, and that's okay. Let's look at one more example, this time auditory. Listen to the following clip from Rihanna's Live Your Life. The actual lyric is, "I'm a paper chaser." When I first heard the song, I heard it as, "I'm a big butt kisser."
Although this says a lot about Yahav and her character, it introduces us to a new perspective, one that was previously unheard to us. Hopefully, after hearing the song a second time, you're able to understand it better and maybe even try to understand Yahav.
We know these examples are relatively small and trivial, but we encourage you to apply them to bigger things, such as who you vote for, how you contribute to our world, and how you view people. Essentially, whether you treat them as fellow humans.
The message we are trying to convey is that perception isn't static and unchanging like we make it to be. We have the power to influence and alter it.
First, however, we must recognize the limiting nature of that single perspective, even if that perspective is all we know. Our ability to alter our perception, and thus the way we live our lives, is directly proportional to our will to educate ourselves.
Exposing ourselves to a multitude of new perspectives may be difficult, as it causes us to question every value we have blindly accepted, but in the greater scheme of things, it benefits us.
Our misconceptions are in fact a result of only being aware of one perspective. Though oftentimes these misconceptions are relatively small and without significant ramifications. In Tanzania, the inability to perceive albinos as fellow human beings has resulted in 76 murders and 22 grave robberies.
We intend on employing the specific case study to illustrate the power perception holds over our understanding and our actions. In Tanzania, the perception of albinos as supernatural beings has caused for adverse effects on the nation as a whole.
Ori and I have been researching the attacks against people with albinism in Tanzania for over 3 months, each writing individual research reports and curating possible policies Tanzania can implement. Although varying interpretations of a Rihanna song won't make a big difference, The perceptions of albinos quite literally makes the difference between life and death.
The mass murder of these innocent, victimized people is the direct result of the perception of albinos as supernatural beings whose limbs are gravely sought after for the black markets and for the use of black magic.
In Tanzania, the possession of albino body parts is perceived to ensure prosperity, and therefore the market for these dismembered limbs is lucrative.
Under the Same Sun is an NGO working to eliminate the discrimination and attacks against people with albinism. We were lucky enough to come into contact with the head of operations, Don Sawatsky, and through our chain of emails, we gained direct insight into the complexity of the issue.
Though the belief's origins are deeply rooted within African rituals and spiritual ideas, they are maintained in the public through a biased media, whose reach extends even to the highest of officials.
Media influence is not unheard of, especially regarding albinos in Tanzania. Jean Burke is a senior lecturer who has worked in research for 20 years, now in the area of human rights and albinism.
Her research illustrates how news reports on the attacks of people with albinism in Tanzania purposefully cause their audience to view the attacks in a singular perspective, either as a criminal activity, a cultural practice, or as a socioeconomic phenomenon.
Each of these perspectives or frames instigate a specific reaction by the public as they now perceive the issue in a certain manner. For example, the socioeconomic frame shifts the blame from witch doctors who instigate these attacks to poverty, which alleviates the public's responsibility to take charge against these criminal offenses.
The criminal activity frame rarely includes the names of head instigators and offenders. Consequently, this perspective causes the public to stray from accusing perpetrators and thus combat the issue.
Although it is rare, the media will sometimes shame the persecution of people with albinism and even go as far as to debunk the myths themselves. Despite this encouragement, however, a society-wide silence persists around the murders of albinos due to this deeply held religious perception.
Some might think that this misconception is a result of lack of education and only manifests itself in the rural parts of Tanzania. But no, this unfortunately is far from reality. Even the Tanzanian politicians, the ones who are supposed to lead the country and act as role models for the citizens, even they succumb to the superstitious belief that albino limbs ensure prosperity. Especially true during election years, politicians propel the grotesque hunting of albinos.
Unable to disregard the preposterous situation any longer, the government admitted on May 27, 2015, that, quote, politicians seek albino limbs ostensibly to boost their chances of winning in the polls.
The media in its entirety must encourage the Tanzanian population to change their perceptions regarding albinos, to incorporate them into the fraternal culture, and to protect them from future attacks.
By framing the persecution of albinos as anything other than a crime against humanity, the media creates an apathetic public of Tanzania. This is interpretation shaping action, or in this case, inaction.
Only when they recognize the other perspective, the perspective we take for granted, where albinos are rightfully considered fellow humans, only then can the Tanzanian society right their wrongs and advance as a people.
Dan Sawatsky asserts that Tanzania, and more generally, sub-Saharan Africa, are stuck in outdated misconceptions. They must open their eyes to the alternative, where their albino brothers are no longer forced into hiding, and they are accepted into their communities and the nation.
Employing these superstitions regarding albinos in Tanzania as an example of the vast power perception holds over our lives, Ori and I encourage you to question, which values have you blindly accepted, and which have you neglected?
In order to initiate this change, we would like to present to you a few concrete examples of what you can do in your everyday lives to change your perception.
We encourage you to alternate between different news sources and evaluate the differences present in the coverage of the same story. Furthermore, consider what each news source classifies as breaking news. Such analyses demonstrate the power of varying perception over your understanding of a situation.
Take a look at the website All Sides, which contrasts distinct headlines from a left, right, and central view. Though tripling the amount of time spent reading the news every morning, All Sides allows us to gain a new understanding of each perspective and cause us to gain an educated decision regarding where we stand on an issue.
All Sides successfully conveys the power of varying perception. We therefore urge you to read a variety of news sources.
Once we understand the power perception holds over our lives and how it potentially inhibits us from seeing things that would otherwise be quite overt, the power then transitions into our hands, and we become capable of transcending the barrier previously limiting our minds.
You are being held back, and we are telling you to push through. Push through so that you see the bigger picture. Push through so that you unlock your full potential. You have the power to change your life, so use it.
Actively working to see more, we are no longer restricted by narrow-mindedness and that singular perspective. We become active, aware, capable, understanding, and, to be blunt, woke.
I don't know what your conditions are today, but I do know that what you make of those circumstances is completely up to you, based on your perception. You get to decide whether something closes the door on hope or opens the door for opportunity. Perception is one of the most powerful tools we have available to us, so use it. Use it to step into the larger truth of who you are and what is possible in your life.
Thank
Thank you.